Hello everyone, my name is Josh and welcome to WHIMS. And today I'm going to be kicking off my 250 greatest films of all time list according to IMDB with sort of a different format than usual because of the nature of the list. It tends to do this thing. I couldn't do what I originally wanted to do with this list by essentially doing it as a countdown going from 250 to 1. So instead I decided to ask on my community page. I asked all of you guys, all my viewers and all my subscribers, pick a number between 250 and 1. And one comment basically said to review number 27. So I looked on the list, and the number 27 film on this list is The Green Mile. And this film came out in 1999, and it was written and directed by Frank Darabont, and it stars Tom Hanks as Paul Edgecombe, who, when we first meet him, he is an elderly man in sort of like a retirement home, and he basically is a guy who keeps to himself. He's very quiet, he's very mild-mannered, he's very polite, but he likes to go off on certain afternoons to go on these long walks. And even the people who work at the retirement home say, "Where do you go when you go on these long walks?" And he goes, "Oh, I just like to go on a walk." And one day when all the elderly people are sort of sitting down watching television, they're watching an episode of Jerry Springer, and one of them turns it over and says, "Oh, it's ridiculous." They talk about all sorts of nonsense, and then he's just flicking through the channels and he comes across a film with Fred Astaire where he's singing the song Heaven. And this gets Paul emotional, and him and his friend go away for a while, and they just basically chat over coffee. And he says he basically opens up to her about his life before he got to the point where he was, and he basically talks about the time when he was actually a prison guard in a place called the Green Mile, which is effectively death row during the 1930s. And he tells the story of when a inmate came to the Green Mile, known as John Coffey, who was known for committing a very horrific crime. And this horrific crime has made him quite hated among, a lot of people in the local community. But he seems like John Coffey, played by Michael Clarke Duncan, seems like such a lovely, sweet-natured, and almost very childlike individual. And it is actually very interesting because how could he have committed such a horrible crime if he seems so sweet-natured? And not only that, but Paul and the other prison guards at the Green Mile find that he also is capable of some very extraordinary abilities. And that's where I'm going to stop there in regards to divulging elements of the plot, because I feel like a lot of this film is meant to be seen as cold as possible. And I think what really makes this film so wonderful is you really do kind of go on an emotional journey with these characters, because it is a story about life. It is a story about the prison system and how we view prisoners as well, because these characters are all in the Green Mile, and they've all done terrible crimes. They've all done murders, or they've all done something very unspeakable that requires them to be there. That's why it's called, the Green Mile. It's essentially death row. And it's a very sad situation because even though these characters, it's kind of the same philosophy as something like The Shawshank Redemption, where, yes, these characters have done terrible things, but it almost does the reverse, where it's like saying, these people have done terrible things, but they're not terrible people. They could very easily just be, people who are struggling on hard times. Like, they do a very good job of really kind of emphasising in this film that film is set during the Great Depression, where a lot of men in America were struggling to find work, and they were struggling to find, even though the most small of jobs, like working on farms and things like that, they really were trying to find jobs because the economy had crashed to a certain degree. It could be because of probation or something like that, but there's all sorts of different details as to how that could have been. But the main focus is that people are falling on hard times, and when you get to falling on hard times, when you're a man in America during that particular era, you tend to get very desperate and you tend to get very lonely, and more often than not, you are in a position where you do get very desperate, and you do tend to do very, harsh and very, inhuman things, but that's because you really are, desperate and you want to find, your way out of it. And some of these characters are really horrible and really evil, like Wild Bill, for instance, who's played by Sam Rockwell, and he is one of those characters who they did such a good job with him. Not only did Sam Rockwell did an incredible job from a performance perspective, but his character is just absolutely vile. Like, he is literally, if you could imagine what a cockroach looks like in human form, that's effectively what Wild Bill looks like to me whenever I see Sam Rockwell as that character. Like, I just think to myself, all I want to do is just spray bug spray at you and watch you just shrivel and die on the floor or something like that. Like, watch you just sort of shrivel and, just sort of cease to exist, because he is literally like that. He is a parasite. He is pure evil. And I really do think that's one of the things that I really do like about this film, is they really do a very good job of making you feel you're not looking at the actors when you're looking at these characters. Like, whenever I see the character, whenever I look at any of the cast members in this film, I don't see Tom Hanks as I don't see Tom Hanks when I see Paul Edgecombe. I see Paul Edgecombe. When I see John Coffey, I don't see Michael Clark Duncan as John Coffey. I see John Coffey. I see all these I see the characters. I don't see the actors whenever I watch these films. But that's because of the writing. That's because of Frank Darabont's beautiful screenplay, and that's because of Stephen King's novel. And I really do think this film is absolutely brilliant. From a structural perspective, it's amazing. Like, the idea of basically telling it from the point of view of Paul Edgecombe when he's at old age, like he's really old, in this retirement home, and then having it sort of flash back to the 1930s. That was a brilliant move, and every single shot, every single transition is a crossfade where you're where sort of jumping from one scene to the next. It's not a fade to black, it's not anything like that, or it's not a quick cut to anything. There's no quick cuts or fades to black or fade ins or fade outs. It's crossfades. Like, one scene would fade out while it's replaced with another scene, and that really adds to the element of the passage of time, which is a theme in this film, with how the clock reads when it comes to counting down to when the first spark is shut down to pass the electricity through. When it comes to inmates dying, the passage of time is a very important clue there. But then it's also it happens in regards to humanity, and also happens in regards to how humanity views people, because back during the Great Depression there was also a lot of racism around, and the racism is a very key element to why John Coffey, played by Michael Clark Duncan, was arrested and charged with murder and sent to the death chair back in this particular time period. Because of the colour of his skin, he was immediately judged, I think, because if it was a white man, he would have probably just been arrested anyway. But I think the fact that it was also a man who was black, it really does kind of add an extra level of, there's extra, hatred or extra betrayal there for a lot of the men and women who find that, who find him with these children dead in his arms. It's such a very dark and very unpleasant element of human nature. But what's really interesting is that it does kind of go to show that times do change eventually, because they kind of almost see, like Paul almost sees that, there is good in the world, and that there may be hatred and there may be evil in the world every day, but then we have to always look at the side that we can always do good for people. And I think that's what God's miracle. If John Coffey can be God's miracle, then there are a ton of other God's miracles in this story, and they're being, mistreated, or they're being treated terribly, or being beaten and abused. But what's very interesting is how you come through that. Like, what I like about John Coffey is, even though he has been brutalised, literally from an early age, because he literally has had such torment and such, anguish, and he's probably been alone for a good portion of his life before this horrible crime found him. And he literally has had such a very positive attitude about everything. Like, he has almost like a very childlike sense of whimsy towards everything. Like, when he, talks about the stars, when he's going out to go and perform one of his miracles on one of the close friends of Paul, he points out at the stars and he looks with such childlike wonder. He says, "Oh, look, that's Cassandra, the lady in the rocking chair." And it's like, it's just so charming and so light-hearted and full of whimsy, and it really just goes to show that even though the world has been cruel to him, he still manages to have this very kind of childlike and very innocent and almost very kind of almost saint-like. And I know I'm kind of laying the Christian allegories and the Catholic allegories very thick here, but I do feel like that's important because it does show that he is almost very saint-like in the way he looks at the world, even though the world has been very cruel to him. And it is actually really beautiful, and it's really wonderfully done, and I feel Frank Darabont did such a good job adapting this story. Because one thing I like about Frank Darabont, and he's done this 3 times with his films. He's done this with The Shawshank Redemption, and he's done it with this, and he's done it with The Mist. He really does a very good job of tapping into the things that Stephen King has tried to say about human nature in a lot of his films. Like, even though people might seem like they're very friendly at first and they go to church every day, they are really kind of almost simmering with these very toxic ideas, like with racism and all these other things. And it really just goes to show that the world is sort of, in a very trapped place where it literally is, almost literally, a Great Depression. It's really well executed in that way, and I really do think both Stephen King and Frank Darabont did a really good job in kind of highlighting that very dark, the very dark side of that era, and almost that sense of the loss of innocence with the death of the girls, with the story that Gary Sinise's character tells of the dog that he had to put down after his son had his eye bitten out. It really goes to show, or scratched out. That just goes to show that human nature will always be a very complicated mechanism in all of our hearts, and I think that's something that really is quite interesting to play with in this film. But I really enjoyed this film. I've seen this film multiple times, and every single time I see it, I always find something new to really appreciate with it. Like the idea about the crossfades, indicating the passage of time, like when we go to them sort of rehearsing the execution to the actual execution having taken place, with the chairs being filled out and laid out, and the visitors coming in to see the execution. That was such a very good move, and of course when you see that happening in regards to when the story begins and when the story ends, or when he kind of is at the very end of the film, when Paul is literally walking around the mall, and then of course he sees Mr. Jingles, this sort of pet mouse that befriends one of the inmates and then later befriends John, and he has sort of like this wonderful ability to be trained and do all these tricks, and then he sort of goes on to raise him. When it crossfades in and out of that, from when he's holding Mr. Jingles and saying, "Oh, we'll get you something to eat, shall we, my old friend?" And then of course we crossfade to him as an old man walking back to the retirement home and walking through the corridors. It's such a very powerful commentary on time and how things tend to change, but how things often stay the same in a lot of instances, because things do change, but then some things don't change. Sometimes old taboos come back, or sometimes really horrible things do crop up, but that's just the nature of time. It's not a perfect thing. It often leaves things scarred, and it often leaves things withered. But what's very important is, with the time that you have, you always have to try to make some sort of fulfillment about it. I really do think that sense of fulfillment is definitely there, and I feel like this film does such a wonderful job of just depicting what it means to be in a moment in time, and just utilising that time exponentially well. And even though you might live in the most depressing era around, you can still find value, and you can still find hope and happiness in those small moments. And it's a very powerful story. It's very well written. Both Stephen King and Frank Darabont's versions are absolutely wonderful. The original novel, when it was first published, was actually done in a serialised format. And this is pretty much an old-fashioned tradition of storytelling or publication, which Charles Dickens often did with a lot of his novels, like Great Expectations or Oliver Twist, or even A Christmas Carol. Like, a lot of his stories were often serialised, and you can see that even now with the publication of comics. Like, every issue of a comic book would always happen monthly. Like, you'd always say, if you want to know what happens to Superman in this story, you have to wait until next month to get to know what's going to happen in that story afterwards. And in that sort of respect, Stephen King could have very easily, missed the boat on this one. But luckily, he was able to really kind of utilise what made those serials great. And he ended every single chapter with something of a cliffhanger. And he always kind of made you want to go, well, if you're invested in the story, you have to find out what happens next week. Or you have to find out what happens next month. And that's kind of like what I've been doing with my short story or story in parts, Angel Dust, where I've just basically been giving you guys little bits of a story that I've written, which is a little bit of superhero story, so there's a little bit of a callback to that. But I digress. I'm not going to talk about this story now. But I do feel like this film is phenomenal, from the screenwriting to the performances, And I love how the cast members just disappear into their roles. Like I said before, when you see these characters, you don't see the actors in the roles. You see John Coffey. You don't see Michael Clark Duncan. You see John Coffey. When you see, Tom Hanks in the role of Paul Edgecombe, you see Paul Edgecombe. It's such a great performance, and it really does a good job of really kind of taking you into that world and re-immersing you into its atmosphere, and really kind of giving you this sense of, it just feels very otherworldly and very fresh, and it's very well done. It's a very well written film as well. I just find there's a lot of things to laugh about in this film as well. That there's a lot of great funny moments and things like that, and it really just is a fantastic film. The score is wonderful by Thomas Newman. He's one of my favourite composers since I saw American Beauty when I was a teenager. I absolutely just love his scores, and I think his score for The Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile are absolutely fantastic. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and sorry if it's getting dark around me. It's actually getting very dark in the room that I'm in at the minute. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoy the new format, and I hope you guys, I want you guys to do me a favour in the comments. Let me know what you thought of this film down in the comments, and please give this film a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and if you would like to see more, please consider subscribing. And I would like you to, you guys to do me a favour, give me a number between 250 and 1 in the comments to see what films you'd like me to do next, because that's what I'm doing now. I'm kind of giving you guys sort of like, a lottery number, and if you pick a certain number, I'll go and check the IMDB 250 greatest films list, and then whatever film that number happens to fall under, I'll be reviewing that for my next video next month. So I hope you guys enjoy the new format, and I hope you guys have a good day, and I hope you enjoy this video, and if you like it, please give it a thumbs up, and please subscribe for more if you're interested in more videos. I hope you're all doing very well. Take care, bye for now.